Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode is number 84, Resizing Quilts and Quilt Blocks. It's an extension and or clarification of Rob Appell's recent video. But before we get to that, I want to bring to your attention my video on binding Christmas tree skirts. It took me many years to figure this out, and with Christmas upon us, many of you are finishing those up now, and if you do need to bind your Christmas tree skirt, I highly encourage you to watch my video. Now, let's get to the episode. Rob recently put out a video on resizing both quilts and quilt blocks, and he didn't quite finish it off with a total explanation. Well, he didn't say anything that was wrong or bad. So let's get to the first part. You can make more or less blocks to change the size of your quilt. Now, people come in the shop and they say, I want to double the size of my quilt. So if you had a quilt block that was 12 inches and you wanted to double it, that would be to 24 inches. But if you double the amount of fabric, you get a one that's 12 inches and a second one that's 12 inches, and you would get a quilt that was 12 by 24. That's not what you intended. You intended to have it 24 by 24. So you need to times 4. And Rob clearly said that in his video. If you have 10 blocks and you want to double it, you need 40 blocks. But he didn't quite explain why you needed to do that. So you have 112, 212, 312, 412 to get to 24 by 24. That's how you get to times 4. So don't come home from the quilt shop with half the amount of fabric that you need. If you're doubling the size of your quilt, you need to multiply your fabric requirements by 4. The next thing that Rob went over was changing the size of the block. And if you watch my channel at all, you know I always say, do your math without the seam allowance and add the seam allowance in again at the end. And we'll also have links to 2 of my math episodes if you want to rewatch those. And he does say that if you have a 12-inch block that's cut 12 and a half and you want to make it half the size, you cut it 6 and a half because of the seam allowance. But I want to just really clarify how those numbers work. So, for example, if you have a 12-inch finished block that the measurement is 12 and a half inches raw edge to raw edge, and you decide you want to make an 8-inch block, 8 is 2/3 of 12. So in that block pattern, if it says to cut a 6 and a half inch square, that would be 6 without the seam allowance. So you take 6 and a half minus the seam allowance is 6. 2/3 of 6 is 4. So you now add the seam allowance back here. You took it off over here, you add it back in over here. 4 plus a half is 4 and a half. So for that piece in your pattern instructions, instead of cutting a 6 and a half inch square, you cut a 4 and a half inch square. And if you always remember that, do all your math without the seam allowance and add the seam allowance back in at the end, you will have no problem resizing blocks. The last thing that Rob talked about was a pattern called Swirling Waters. And it was a storm at sea block like this one. Give me 1 second, we need to switch out the board. Here is my drawing of the storm at sea block. It contains a square and a square and a square, That's the unit that Deb Tucker calls stacked squares. It has 4 diamond rects and then has 4 regular square and a squares. And in this example, he said, this is a block I wouldn't try to resize because the math would be too difficult. And I'm here to tell you, you can resize any block you want to resize. You just need the right equipment. The hardest number in here is this stacked square, the center square, to get that the correct size. And if you have Deb Tucker's stacked square technique sheet, it's got all the numbers on it that you need to make a finished inside from 1 to 12 inches. So it gives you a lot of flexibility on your block size. The other thing you have to know is the proportions. And the way that the diamond Rex works, it's kind of similar to the flying geese where they go 2 by 4, 4 by 6. It's half. So if this is a 6-inch square, this is 3 by 6. If this is an 8-inch square, it's 4 by 8. And then these are squares. So if this is 4 by 8, this is a 4-inch square. If this is 3 by 6, it's a 3-inch square. So depending on what size block you want to make, you just have to know your proportions. This is just 3 examples. We could have done more. The 12-inch block, the center stacked square is 6 inches. The diamond Rex is 3 by 6. The square to square is 3. If you want a 16-inch block, the center is 8. The diamond Rex are 4 by 8. And the square and a square is 4. And if you want a 20-inch block, the center is 10. The diamond Rex are 5 by 10. And the square and a square is 5. And Deb Tucker has all the tools and all the information to resize these. And it's really easy. But the unusual thing that I found out when I was trying to figure out what size the Swirling Waters block was, it's a foundation paper pieced pattern. It's not even traditionally pieced. So with a foundation paper pieced pattern, that's the easiest thing in the world to resize. You put it in the copier. The only math you need is, do you want to decrease it and make it 75% of the size or 66% of the size? Half? You want to do it 1 1/4, make it bigger. 1 1/2, make it bigger. As long as the size that you are making you can fit on the piece of paper, you can do it on your home copier. If you want to go bigger, you can always go to Office Max or one of those kind of stores and use one of their copiers that they have the 11 by 17 paper. But with foundation paper piecing, that's the easiest resize of all. So I'm not quite sure why Rob thought that you shouldn't try to resize it because the math would be too hard. At any rate, you can resize anything you want. One of my math videos is how to resize when the math doesn't work. And we will, like I said, have links to those below. But that's the episode on resizing. You can do anything you want. It's your quilt. So please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.